How's it going, everyone, and welcome back to the Change-Up. You've seen it 1,000 times. A player steps into the dugout, tucks something into his cheek, and spits. Pretty standard stuff for any baseball fan to see. But why do we see this specifically in baseball? I mean, not seeing it in basketball kind of makes sense, can't really spit on wood floors, but why is it not so much of a thing in football? And come to think of it, why is it so normalized? I mean, nobody talks about it. Announcers don't mention it. Fans barely register it anymore. That habit, that single pretty gross image, is the result of over 150 years of history, of one industry deliberately targeting a sport, and of a league that tried to quit and couldn't. And today, it's still happening, just in a slightly different way. This is the story of baseball's tobacco and nicotine addiction, and it goes a lot deeper than you think. To understand tobacco's origin in baseball, you have to go back to a time before baseball even existed as an organized sport. In the early 19th century, chewing tobacco wasn't a baseball thing, it was an American thing. Specifically, it was America's way of rejecting England. Pipe smoking had been the preferred method of tobacco use on both sides of the Atlantic for generations. But in the 1700s, British aristocrats became obsessed with snuff, finely ground tobacco powder you inhaled through your nose. It came in little decorative boxes, and it was considered refined and proper, and Americans wanted absolutely nothing to do with it. So they chewed instead. By 1842, chewing tobacco was so embedded in American culture that when novelist Charles Dickens visited the United States, he was genuinely appalled. He wrote about Washington, D.C. in his travelogue American Notes, describing it as, and this is a direct quote, "the headquarters of tobacco-tinctured saliva." He went on to describe American courtrooms, where the judge had his own spittoon, the court crier had his own spittoon, the witnesses had their own spittoons, and the jurors had their own spittoons. Hell, the criminal probably had his own spittoon. Medical schools had signs on the walls asking students to please spit their tobacco juice into the designated boxes so as to not discolor the stairs. That was 1842, the same year Americans played what historians believe was the first ever game of baseball in Manhattan. These two things, chewing tobacco and baseball, were literally born into the exact same cultural moment. They grew up together, and it's not a coincidence. Early ball players had practical reasons for chewing beyond just fitting into American culture. Ballparks in the 19th century were dusty, dry, and hot, and players were out on the field for hours. Chewing tobacco stimulates saliva production. It kept their mouths from drying out in a way that water breaks simply didn't allow for in a 9-inning game. When fielding gloves came into widespread use in the 1870s and 1880s, players discovered that tobacco spit was excellent for softening and conditioning the leather. So tobacco wasn't just a habit at the time, it was woven into the actual mechanics of the game. Now here's something that I'm sure some of you know, but a lot of you might not. Baseball cards were invented by the tobacco industry. In 1888, cigarette companies started inserting small cardboard cards featuring baseball players into their cigarette packs. This wasn't for the fans, it was a structural decision. The cards stiffened the thin paper packaging around loose tobacco, but they quickly became something much more powerful. Marketing tools that put the faces of beloved athletes directly into the hands of consumers every time they bought a pack. Think about what that meant. You couldn't watch baseball on television, you couldn't follow players on social media, but if you bought cigarettes, you got a baseball card. For some people, it was the most practical way to learn more about their favorite ball player. The two things became inseparable in the public imagination. By the early 1900s, tobacco companies had figured out that baseball wasn't just a sport. It was a marketing platform unlike anything else in America. In 1912, a tobacco company called W.T. Blackwell, makers of Bull Durham tobacco, launched what might be the most clever advertising campaign in baseball history. They installed massive painted signs featuring their bull mascot on the outfield fences of almost every major league ballpark in the country, and they offered $50, equivalent to roughly $1,500 today, to any player who hit a home run off the sign. The signs were placed in the outfield near where relief pitchers warmed up before entering the game. Some historians believe this is actually where the term bullpen comes from, the area near the Bull Durham signs. It's worth noting that this origin is debated, and MLB's own official historian has challenged it, but the theory has persisted for over a century, which tells you something about how deeply Bull Durham had embedded itself into the game. And the actual numbers from that campaign are staggering. In 1912 alone, the Bull Durham signs were hit 211 times. The company paid out thousands of dollars in prize money and gave away over 257,000 free sacks of tobacco to players who hit home runs in parks with their signs. In other words, baseball players were receiving free tobacco just for playing well. Between 1920 and 1940, when baseball was unquestionably America's most popular sport, every single major league team had a tobacco sponsor. Every single one. Babe Ruth, the most famous athlete in the world, appeared in tobacco advertisements regularly. His image was in cigar ads, cigarette ads, and chewing tobacco ads. The message to fans was unmistakable. Tobacco and greatness go hand in hand. Ruth died in 1948 at age 53 of throat cancer. His former teammate, Joe DiMaggio, appeared in a Chesterfield cigarette ad the following year. The tobacco industry had turned baseball into a billboard, and it worked for decades. Then something unexpected happened. In the 1960s, the United States Surgeon General began publishing reports linking cigarette smoking to lung cancer and heart disease. For the first time, the federal government was officially telling the public that cigarettes could kill you. For tobacco companies, this was a crisis. Their primary product was under attack, but they saw an opportunity in baseball. If cigarettes were dangerous, maybe smokeless tobacco was the answer. It didn't produce smoke, you didn't inhale it. Compared to cigarettes, it seemed safer. So tobacco companies began placing free tins of dip, a more refined smokeless product that didn't require chewing, directly into major league clubhouses. Players didn't have to seek them out, it was just there waiting for them. And the strategy worked. Smokeless tobacco use among ball players surged back. By the 1980s, 45% of major league ball players reported using it. A 1999 study found that 31% of the league's rookies used smokeless tobacco, compared to just 6.5% of American males their age. This is the part that I find genuinely fascinating. Because by the time serious health warnings about smokeless tobacco started circulating in baseball, the habit had already stopped being primarily about nicotine for most players. It had become something deeper. A 2017 study published in the Journal of Substance Use surveyed over 100 current and former professional players. They found that 68% had started using smokeless tobacco before the age of 18, almost always by watching and imitating older teammates or coaches. Only 12% said peer pressure was the main driver. 73% pointed to the perceived performance benefits or simply that it was part of their routine. Their phrase for it was that it helped them stay sharp or that it was just part of my prep. When you repeat a behavior in the same environment over and over, the environment itself eventually triggers the behavior automatically. The dugout, the smell of the field, the sounds of batting practice. For a player who had dipped since high school, these sensory cues were stronger than any craving. The habit wasn't just about wanting tobacco anymore, it was about continuity, about feeling like a ball player. While players were developing these habits as teenagers, the tobacco industry was actively helping that process along. Smokeless tobacco companies ran advertising campaigns directly targeting young athletes, using slogans that have since become infamous. For decades, baseball had largely looked the other way. Players chewed, coaches chewed, and managers chewed. The culture sustained itself. And then, on June 16, 2014, Tony Gwynn died. He was 54 years old. Gwynn was one of the greatest hitters in the history of baseball. 8 batting titles, a career .338 average, a Hall of Famer, and by almost every account, one of the most genuinely good people the sport had ever seen. He had been diagnosed in 2010 with cancer of the salivary gland in his right cheek, the same cheek where he had packed dip every single game of his 20-year major league career, and for a decade after that as a college coach at San Diego State. He had started dipping as a 17-year-old freshman before the products had even carried health warnings. The medical reality is complicated, and there are a couple of different stories here. Doctors at the time noted that his specific type of cancer, salivary gland cancer, had not been definitively linked to smokeless tobacco use. Some of his physicians said they could not confirm that tobacco had caused it. But Tony Gwynn himself believed it did. His son, Tony Gwynn Jr., said his father came out of his first surgery and was told by a doctor that the cancer couldn't be confirmed as tobacco caused. Gwynn's response, according to his son, was, "You don't need to." His family later filed a lawsuit against the tobacco companies, alleging that he had been deliberately targeted as a young athlete addicted to their products before health warnings existed, and that his death was a result of their knowing and calculated deception. Gwynn's death shook the baseball world in a way that decades of health warnings hadn't. Players who had been coached by him at San Diego State, including Steven Strasburg and Addison Reed, publicly announced that they were quitting in the weeks after his death. In 2016, MLB and the Players Association reached an agreement as part of the collective bargaining process, saying that smokeless tobacco would be banned for all new players entering the league. Players already in the majors could continue, and the union protected their right to do so, but no new player would be permitted to use it during the games or team functions. There's some debate on how much the league actually enforces this rule, but it was the most significant step baseball had taken in 150 years of this relationship, and it almost certainly would not have happened without Tony Gwynn. So baseball banned tobacco. The story ends here, right? Well, not quite. If you were to walk into an MLB clubhouse today, you'd find something that wasn't there 10 years ago. Small, white pouches. No tobacco leaf, sure, no spitting and no smell. Players tuck them under their lips during games, and you'd never know they were there on camera. They're called, of course, nicotine pouches, or more commonly known by their popular brand name, Zins. And they've exploded in baseball clubhouses to the point where reporters covering the sport say they're more widespread than chewing tobacco ever was in its peak years. The legal disclaimer and the loophole here is that nicotine pouches don't contain tobacco leaf. They're made from nicotine powder, so technically they don't fall under the MLB's smokeless tobacco ban. Players can use them freely at any age and in any game. While nicotine pouches are technically safer than chewing tobacco, they are still very unhealthy, and most of the long-term effects are still unknown because of how relatively new they are. And in my mind, the cycle here just continues. Sales of nicotine pouches nationwide increased sixfold between 2019 and 2022. Philip Morris, one of the world's largest tobacco companies, reported that its shipments of Zyn pouches rose nearly 80% in just the first quarter of 2024. The tobacco industry watched baseball try to quit, and they came back with a loophole and the same playbook they've always used. Get it into the clubhouse, make it a part of the routine, and let the culture do the rest. Baseball did not beat its 150-year addiction, it just rebranded it. Thank you everybody so much for watching, it really does mean a lot to me. If you liked the video, please make sure to like and subscribe, it really does help me out a lot. This past video that I released reached a bigger audience than usual, so if you're new here, welcome, and make sure to keep tuning in to more baseball content right here on The Changeup. And as always, I will see you guys in the next video.